Hello and welcome back to the Galley of the Sun. Today is a special day here at the Oasis that happens once every 30 to 45 days. Today is the day we remove these beauties from the steak locker and carve them up. Today I will be carving up these aged ribeye roasts into steaks and some other wonderful things. Then we will prepare another roast for a glorious 45-day adventure. During that 45 days, it will transform from a mild-mannered ribeye roast into a glorious whiskey-aged ribeye roast. First of all, the story of how I turned into a meat snob. Many of my friends refer to themselves as beer snobs. They would not touch a Bud Light with a 10-foot pole. That is a 3-meter pokey stick for our European viewers. They prefer microbrews. I myself will throw back a Bud Light anytime on a hot day. But as far as meat goes, I am a meat snob. Growing up in central Kansas in the 70s and 80s, steak meant sirloin. My father was born shortly after the Great Depression, and his parents did not spend any more than absolutely necessary on food. It's a trait born of necessity, and they carried it through the rest of their lives. I was always amazed how my grandmother could feed 10 people on a $20 budget. Dad always properly seasoned our sirloins and cooked them to a perfect medium rare, and I enjoyed them. I thought they were fantastic until at age 16, I got a job as a dishwasher at a Golden Corral steakhouse. There, I discovered ribeyes. Sure, the ribeyes were a little bit more pricey, but that marbled fat that ran through them just provided a flavor that those lean sirloins could not match. From that moment on, if I was going to have steak, I was going to have ribeyes. But that all changed on my first trip to Las Vegas. There, at Gallagher Steakhouse in the New York casino, I had my first aged ribeye, and that moment changed me. I was blown away by the flavor and the incredible tenderness. The dry aging process removes water from the muscle of the meat, and you would think that that would make it dry then. Oh nay nay, moose breath. A perfectly grilled, medium rare aged ribeye is as tender as you can imagine and has juices aplenty. And that's because the dry aging process breaks down those connective fibers in the meat, making it incredibly tender. So upon returning from that glorious Las Vegas trip, I was on a mission, and I got lucky. In the town I was living at the time, Port Orchard, Washington, there was a butcher shop that sold dry aged ribeyes. Sure, they were about 25 bucks a pound, but it was money well spent. And then tragedy struck. A disagreement with the landlord, and that butcher shop was gone. But fate intervened. The local Safeway changed hands to a different chain, and at the meat counter at that grocery store, I could again find dry aged ribeyes, again paying about 25 bucks a pound. Unfortunately, a few short weeks later, that deal fell through, and the grocery store reverted back to a Safeway, and again, I had no aged ribeye supply. Again, fate dealt me a winning hand. I was tooling around the internet one night, made it to Kickstarter, and saw that this company, Steak Locker, was raising funds to make it possible for you to dry age meat in your own home. So as fast as I could yell, "Take my $1,600 now," I ordered the thing, and it was in my house, and everything was glorious. But then again, tragedy struck. After I retired from the Navy with 30 years and 5 months of service, because 30's for quitters, we moved down here to the paradise of the Valley of the Sun. But alas, my steak locker did not survive. I contacted the company and tried to get parts to fix it. But since I had a first generation steak locker and they'd changed so many components in the intervening years, it was not to be. But fate smiled upon me again. As going through the internet, I saw that Kingsford was opening up their own line of steak agers. And it was $900 cheaper than my previous one. So that brings us to today, 1 year later from that glorious moment that my steak ager arrived here at the Oasis. Now, you could dry age your own ribeye roasts in your refrigerator with this device called Umi bags. They're relatively cheap and you can find them on Amazon, but it's going to take up an entire shelf in your refrigerator for 30 to 45 days. As much as we marinate here at Valley of the Sun or prep large meals where I need to keep a large amount of food cool, that wouldn't work for us. So alas, the steak ager. So we've done a lot of experimenting with our steak ager, and we found that about 30 days is what we need to transform a regular ribeye roast into aged ribeye perfection. Or it takes about 45 days if we want to do something extra special, which we will be doing today. It is time to remove these two beautiful aged ribeye roasts from the steak ager and carve them up. Part of that is going to be removing that rough outer layer that is called the pentosyl. Now, when we started aging our own steaks, we would just take that stuff and throw it away. I did a little bit of research, and it said it makes great food for your dogs. But alas, I no longer have dogs, I have cats. So I did some more research. You can take that and make some magical stuff called aged ground beef, which we're going to do in our very next video. But for now, it is time to carve these things up. The ribeye roast is going to have a side that's a little bit flatter. That's the side that you want down so it moves on you less, and you need a very sharp knife for this because that pentosyl is a bit tough to get. The most important thing about the steak though is making sure that the thickness is even all the way through that steak. That's so the whole thing cooks at the same rate when you're putting these on the grill or a cast iron skillet, which we'll be doing later. Now that's a steak. So what I'm doing right here is my last steak had the thickness that I wanted it. I'm scoring the rest of the roast to make sure that all the follow-on steaks are the same thickness. Therefore, cook at the same rate. Okay, we're down to this little part right here, right? So if I cut this to the thickness of the other ones, it's going to be very odd shaped. I won't get all the pentosyl off. But that's okay, because I can take the meat that's left from this, get the pentosyl off, and make some shaved ribeye. Can you imagine an aged ribeye Philly cheesesteak? I can. I can. All right, now we got our steaks cut. And during that process, I paused twice and sharpened my knife again. So if you feel that it's getting harder to cut through, definitely stop, clean off your knife, get it sharpened, and get back to it. It makes all the difference in the world. So now I've got those two end caps. I'm going to remove the pentosyl from these and then leave the rest there to be shaved for aged ribeye Philly cheesesteaks later. All of that pentosyl we're getting saved and set aside. Okay, those end caps are cut down, ready for the shaving. Now the steaks. So you can try and take the pentosyl off when it's still in the roast form. We've tried it before. It is a giant pain. Much easier when you have them down to steaks. Also, if there's any excess fat on there that you want to take off, such as this right here, this is the time to do it. Now, every bit of this aged ribeye roast is gold, so you save every piece. The pentosyl and the scraps go in your aged ground beef, Any irregular cuts that don't look like a good steak get shaved down and used for something later. All right, those 2 roasts have yielded us 16 absolutely beautiful, thick, aged ribeyes. Also, I've got these scraps of meat, which either make weird looking steaks or they were a little bit thinner than I wanted them to be or whatever. So we're going to take that, shave it down, and I have this big pile here of the pelicile. It pains me to say that for a couple years, we would carve these up, and this right here would just get thrown away. But now it has a future home in a fantastic burger made here at the Valley of the Sun. We'll cover that in the next video. Alrighty, so time to shave the roast beef. First thing you gotta do is put down a wet towel to keep the slicer from sliding around on you. All right, so yes, we do have a slicer at the Valley of the Sun. Because we make our own bacon and we age these ribeyes, so the odd little pieces like this, we can turn these into shaved aged ribeye to make some incredible things. We purchased a slicer. This was about 150 bucks if I remember right. If you want to buy a slicer and you want to get it to cut your steaks also, a big thing about the price differences in these slicers is how wide they will cut. This one will go to about 1 inch. There is a jump in price between the ones that go 3/4 to 7/8 of an inch up to 1 inch. You know, if you're just going to shave things, if you're going to make bacon, this is a great thing to have. So get our meat in there, get this set to very, very thin. We'll do the first test cut. Yeah, that is coming out beautiful. That is going to be incredible on some Philly cheesesteaks. All right, so this here, the pusher for the slicer, you can see has those teeth on it. So there's going to be a point to where your piece of meat gets so thin that you risk ramming these into your blade, which you don't want to do, but that's okay. This here, you can either take that and try and use a knife and get it down, or if you're going to save that pelicile, then this can go in that pile right there, and it's going to end up in your aged ground beef. And this is a great time to say, if you're picking up what we're laying down here, if you think what we do is rad, gnarly, awesome, cool, tubular, then hit that subscribe button. Also hit that like button. If there's something you'd like to see us try, put it down in the comments. The other method you can use to make sure that you get as much shaved aged ribeye as you can is when your piece gets real small and you start getting the danger of those little teeth hitting the blade, just add another piece of meat and use that to sandwich. Just add another piece of meat and use that to sandwich your odd shape to be able to push it up against the blade. All right, so it's all done but the packaging. So those 2 ribeye roasts yielded us 16 beautiful, thick, aged ribeye steaks. It also yielded us a good pile here, probably 2 to 3 pounds of shaved aged ribeye that's gonna make Philly cheesesteaks like you cannot believe. And it's given us this large heap over here of pelicile, which we're going to take later and make aged ground beef. So follow us for the next video where that happens. All right, so I got my 4 labeled bags here. It's time to get this packaged up and into the freezer. We'll give the steak ager a quick cleaning, and then we will prep our next roast to go in. But unlike these last 2 roasts, it's not just going to be a ribeye roast that's aged, which is incredible. We like to step things up a notch here at Valley of the Sun. We like to step things up a notch here at Galley of the Sun. So it's going to be whiskey aged ribeye. The previous roasts are all cut up, all put up in the freezer. The steak ager has been cleaned out. Now it's time for the next step, to prepare our whiskey aged ribeye roast. So what I have here is about a 12.5 pound ribeye roast. We're going to get this opened up. We're going to pat down the outside to get it nice and dry. After that, don't you dare trim anything at this point. I don't care how it looks, because as you saw before, that outside layer is going to get turned into what's called the pellicile. And you're going to end up cutting that off anyway. And then either using it to make tallow, to make beef broth, to make aged ground beef, or to feed to your lovely little furry friends. So none of that comes off because we're going to trim it at the end anyway. Out of the plastic bag, try and catch as much of the blood as you can in the plastic bag. And then the roast goes on your paper towels and we get it all dried off. Okay, now, as I said, get it patted down. Let's get this as dry as we can get it. Okay, so to whiskey age this, we're not going to inject it with whiskey. We're not just going to pour whiskey on it. We need something to hold that whiskey next to the roast that's going to eventually soak into that roast and give it an incredible flavor. So we're going to wrap this entire roast with some terry cloth wash rags. Okay, it looks like it's going to take about 5 of them. I got 3 underneath on top of each other. Here's 2 more. A big package of 25 of these from Amazon is dirt cheap. Okay, got it all wrapped up, but we're going to keep that terry cloth around that roast, so we're going to have to tie it off with some butcher's twine. So I'm going to get my twine laid out first, and then I'm going to tie it off from the middle going out. We'll see if I can execute this myself, or we'll need my lovely assistant. All right, so I got my 5 strings laid off. You want to start from the middle, and you want to wrap it around twice. 1, 2. Pull that guten tight, which is German for very snug. Keep your finger there, and execute a square knot. Supervision is required. One more around the long way. Okay, so if you aren't whiskey aging, then you don't do this step. You just get the hooks into your roast and then put it into the steak locker. But if you're going to whiskey age it or some other kind of liquid, got to get those terry cloth around there. Now for the whiskey. So we're going to be using some Noah's Hills whiskey today. And you're just trying to get the terry cloth soaked. So you don't want it dripping, but you want it good and saturated. I know something's going to come out, but we'll move our towels around and soak that up a little bit. Here we go. And what seems to work best is pour a little bit, let it soak in a little bit, and then pour in a little bit more. We're going to flip it and get this backside going. We'll soak up with the sides what's been spilled down. And then get some more here. There we go. Now we're going to let it set for about 5 minutes. Let that whiskey hit every bit of that terry cloth, because anything that drips off, we're losing that flavor, and then we'll get it hung in the steak locker.
Added note, you see he's using the scissors. there just to kind of open the hole in the terry cloth. That's something you might need to do, especially if you don't have razor sharp hooks, which is probably not the best thing either.
Now it's into the steak ager. 45 days from now, we're gonna have some magic. It's been our experimentation, as I said before, regular ribeye roast, 30 days, great flavor. Going 40, 45, 60 doesn't really change it. But when you are wrapping it in terry cloth and soaking it in some kind of liquid, such as whiskey, it takes about 45 days. A little bit extra moisture to remove. I hope you like what you saw today. Hit that like button. Thank you very much and see you next time on Galley of the Sun.